There's this old textile factory on the outskirts of my hometown that's been closed since the 1980s. Everyone knew about it, but most people just drove past without giving it much thought. The thing is, this place had a reputation. Not just for being abandoned, but for the accident that shut it down, a massive fire that killed 3 workers who got trapped inside. My friends Marcus, Sarah, and I had been talking about checking it out for months. We were all seniors in high school, and honestly, we were running out of things to do in our boring small town. Sarah had this whole urban exploration phase where she was obsessed with taking photos of abandoned places for her Instagram. We decided to go on a Friday night after everyone got off work. The factory sat behind a chain-link fence, but there were obvious gaps where people had cut through before. The main building was this massive brick structure, probably 4 stories tall, with rows and rows of broken windows staring down at us like empty eye sockets. Marcus brought bolt cutters just in case, but we didn't need them. Someone had already made a person-sized hole in the fence. Sarah was immediately snapping photos with her camera, the flash lighting up sections of the building in these brief, stark moments. We found an entrance through a loading dock where the metal door had been pried open years ago. The smell hit us immediately, this mix of rust, mold, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something sweet and sickly. Inside, our phone flashlights revealed this enormous open space filled with old machinery. Massive looms and spinning wheels covered in decades of dust and spider webs. Sarah was in photographer heaven, but something about the place made my skin crawl. We decided to check out the upper floors. The staircase was metal and every step echoed through the building like a gunshot. The second floor had what looked like old offices, desks still scattered around, papers yellowed with age, calendars still turned to October 1987. That's when we heard it for the first time. This low humming sound, like machinery running. We all stopped dead in our tracks. Is someone else here? Sarah whispered. The humming stopped. Marcus laughed nervously. Probably just the building settling or something. We kept exploring, but the humming started up again. This time it was coming from above us. The 3rd floor. Against my better judgment, we climbed another flight of stairs. The 3rd floor was different. Darker somehow, even though it had the same broken windows. And it was warm up there. Way too warm for a building with no heating. The humming was louder now, and we could see a faint orange glow coming from the far end of the floor. Sarah raised her camera to take a photo, and the flash lit up the entire space for just a split second. In that brief moment of light, we saw them. 3 figures standing motionless between the old machines. They looked like workers, overalls, hard hats, but something was wrong. They were too tall, too thin, and they were facing us even though we hadn't made any noise. The humming stopped completely. Sarah grabbed my arm so hard I thought she might break it. Marcus was already backing toward the stairs, but I couldn't move. I was staring at where those figures had been, but now in our phone lights, there was nothing there. That's when we heard the footsteps. Heavy boots on metal, getting closer. But not from where we'd seen the figures, from behind us, between us and the stairs. We ran. I don't even remember making the decision, we just all bolted at the same time. Sarah dropped her camera and it clattered down the stairs ahead of us. We jumped down steps 3 at a time, Marcus nearly wiping out on the 2nd floor landing. The footsteps followed us, always just close enough to hear but never close enough to see who they belonged to. We burst out through that loading dock entrance and didn't stop running until we reached Marcus's car. As we drove away, Sarah was crying and Marcus was shaking. I looked back at the factory one last time and swear I saw 3 orange lights in the 3rd floor windows, just standing there, watching us leave. We never talked about what we saw that night. Sarah gave up urban exploration completely. And that factory? It burned down again 3 months later. The fire department said it was electrical, but the building had been without power for 30 years. I grew up in a city with an extensive subway system, most of which was still in use. But there were sections, whole stations sometimes, that had been abandoned when they rerouted lines or built newer tunnels. These places became legendary among urban explorers, and my friend group had always talked about finding a way in. The opportunity came during my junior year of college. My roommate Tyler had met this guy at a party who claimed he knew how to access the old Central Line tunnels that had been sealed off in the 1960s. The guy, who went by Snake for reasons I never learned, offered to show us the way in exchange for splitting the cost of some specialized equipment he needed. Our group consisted of me, Tyler, his girlfriend Megan, and my friend Chris from high school who was visiting for the weekend. Snake met us at a coffee shop near the university and laid out the plan. There was a maintenance entrance in the basement of an old office building that connected to the abandoned system. The building's security was minimal at night, and he had a contact who could get us access. Looking back, the whole thing felt sketchy from the start, but we were college kids and the idea of exploring genuine abandoned subway tunnels was too tempting to pass up. We met Snake at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. He had brought industrial-grade flashlights, emergency blankets, and a hand-drawn map of the tunnel system. The guy clearly knew what he was doing, which made me feel both more confident and more nervous. The office building was one of those generic corporate towers from the 1970s. Snake's contact let us in through a service entrance and led us to a freight elevator that took us 3 floors below street level. The basement was all concrete and utility pipes, but in the far corner was a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" that had been painted over so many times you could barely read it. Snake produced a set of keys and unlocked the door. Beyond it was a narrow tunnel that sloped downward into complete darkness. The air was thick and humid, and you could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. "Stay close," Snake said. "The main tunnel is about a quarter mile down this access way. Don't touch anything that looks electrical, and if you hear a train, find an alcove and press yourself against the wall." "Wait," Chris said, "I thought these tunnels were abandoned." Snake grinned. "Mostly." The access tunnel felt endless. Our footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, and more than once I heard what sounded like voices coming from ahead of us, only to realize it was just our own conversations bouncing back distorted. Finally, we emerged into the main tunnel, and it was incredible. The space was huge, easily 20 feet high and wide enough for 2 trains to pass. The walls were tiled in this beautiful green and white pattern that must have been stunning when it was new. Old advertisements for products that hadn't existed in decades were still visible behind layers of grime and graffiti. We spent about an hour exploring, taking photos and marveling at the abandoned platforms. Snake showed us the old ticket booths and explained how the system had worked before it was decommissioned. Megan found an old subway map that showed stations with names I'd never heard of. That's when we heard the train. It started as a low rumble that you felt in your chest more than heard. Snake immediately grabbed his flashlight and started looking for an alcove, motioning frantically for us to follow. But Tyler, being Tyler, wanted to see the train. "Dude, this is probably our only chance to see one of these old cars running," he said, walking toward the sound. "Tyler, no." Snake shouted, but Tyler was already 50 feet down the tunnel. The rumbling got louder, and suddenly there were lights. Bright, old-fashioned train lights cutting through the darkness of the tunnel. But something was wrong. The train was moving too slowly, and it was completely silent except for that rumbling. Tyler stopped walking and turned back toward us, and in the light from the approaching train, I could see his face. He looked terrified. The train pulled into view, and it was like something from the 1940s. All dark green cars with small windows, and those windows were lit from inside. But here's the thing that made my blood run cold: there were people inside. Passengers. Sitting in neat rows, all wearing clothes that looked like they were from decades ago. And they were all staring at Tyler. Snake was screaming at us to run, but I couldn't move. I watched as the train came to a complete stop right next to Tyler. One of the doors slid open with this horrible screeching sound, and I could see inside the car. The passengers weren't moving. They were just sitting there, perfectly still, all facing the door. All looking at Tyler. Tyler took a step toward the train. That broke whatever spell I was under. I grabbed Megan and Chris and we all ran back toward the access tunnel. Snake was right behind us, but he kept looking back and shouting Tyler's name. We made it to the access tunnel and I turned around one last time. Tyler was standing in the doorway of the train car, but he wasn't moving. He was just standing there, perfectly still, like the other passengers. The train doors closed, and it disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel. We ran all the way back to the surface. Snake was panicking, talking about calling the police, but what would we tell them? That our friend got on a ghost train in an abandoned subway tunnel? The police found Tyler 3 days later. He was sitting on a bench in the active subway system, completely catatonic. He had no memory of what happened in the tunnels, and doctors said he was in perfect physical health. He just wasn't the same anymore. Like something essential about him had been left behind on that train. Snake disappeared after that night. I tried to find him to ask questions, but it was like he'd never existed. The office building contact claimed he'd never heard of anyone named Snake. Tyler never fully recovered. He finished college, got a job, got married, but there was always something missing. Like he was just going through the motions of being alive. Sometimes, when we'd hang out, I'd catch him staring off into space, and I wondered if he was thinking about that train, wherever it was still running in the darkness beneath the city. During my senior year of high school, there was this abandoned radio tower about 30 minutes outside town that became something of a local legend. The tower itself was maybe 200 feet tall, surrounded by a small building that had housed the broadcasting equipment back when it was operational. It had been shut down in the early 2000s when the radio station went out of business, and it had been sitting empty ever since. The legend was that sometimes, late at night, you could pick up broadcasts on AM radio coming from the tower. People claimed they heard old radio shows, music from the 1950s, and sometimes voices speaking in languages no one could identify. Most people assumed it was just interference from other stations, but the stories persisted. My friends Jake, Emma, and David had been talking about checking out the tower for months. Emma was into the paranormal stuff and was convinced we'd find something supernatural there. Jake just wanted to climb the tower for the adrenaline rush, and David went along with whatever we decided to do. We planned to go on Halloween night, because Emma said that's when the veil between worlds is thinnest, or something like that. I thought it was silly, but the symbolism felt right. The tower was located down a dirt road that wound through some dense woods. Jake drove us in his pickup truck, and the headlights cutting through the trees created these shifting shadows that made everything look alive and moving. The October air was crisp and full of the smell of rotting leaves. When we finally reached the clearing where the tower stood, it was somehow both exactly what I expected and completely different. The tower itself was massive, much bigger than it looked from the road. It was surrounded by guy wires and had this ominous red light blinking at the top. The building at its base was small and concrete, with no windows and a single metal door. Emma immediately pulled out this old transistor radio she'd brought and started scanning through stations. Sure enough, she picked up some strange interference around the 1240 AM frequency, mostly static, but occasionally you could hear what sounded like voices or music fading in and out. The door to the building was locked, but Jake had brought bolt cutters. The lock was old and rusty, and it snapped easily. Inside, the building was just one room filled with dusty broadcasting equipment. Most of it looked like it hadn't been touched since the station closed, but some of the newer digital equipment was missing, probably stolen by scrappers over the years. Emma was getting more excited by the minute. Her radio was picking up clearer signals inside the building, and she swore she could hear an old-time radio drama playing. David and I mostly heard static, but there was definitely something coming through. Jake wanted to climb the tower. There was a ladder built into the structure that went all the way to the top, though it looked pretty sketchy. Emma wanted to stay inside and mess with the radio equipment to see if she could boost the signal somehow. Against my better judgment, I decided to climb the tower with Jake. David stayed with Emma in the building. The ladder was in worse shape than it looked from the ground. Several of the rungs were loose or missing entirely, and the whole structure swayed in the wind. But the view was incredible. We could see the lights of town in the distance, and the forest stretched out below us like a dark ocean. That's when I noticed the radio in Emma's backpack was getting louder. Even from 150 feet up, I could hear it clearly. But it wasn't static anymore. It was music. Big band music from the 1940s, playing as clear as if someone was broadcasting live. Jake heard it too. "That's impossible," he said. "Radio waves don't work like that." Then the music stopped, and a voice came through the radio. A man's voice, speaking in that old-fashioned announcer style. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Broadcasting live from station WXYZ, bringing you the sounds of yesterday, today, and tomorrow." I felt the hair on my arm stand up. WXYZ was the call sign of the radio station that had operated from this tower. I'd researched it before we came out here. The voice continued, "We have some special guests with us tonight. 4 young people who've come to visit our little station. Jake, Emma, David, and..." There was a pause. "Well, hello there. What's your name?" Jake and I looked at each other. The radio announcer had just said our names. Our actual names. That's when we heard Emma screaming from the building below. We climbed down that ladder faster than should have been humanly possible. I scraped my hands raw on the metal rungs and Jake nearly fell twice, but we made it to the ground in what felt like seconds. Inside the building, Emma was backed against the far wall, pointing at the radio equipment. David was standing in the middle of the room, perfectly still, with his eyes closed. And all of the old broadcasting equipment was turned on. Lights blinking, meters moving, even though none of it was plugged in. The radio in Emma's backpack was now playing what sounded like a live conversation. Multiple voices, talking over each other, and they were all talking about us. "The tall one is named Jake," said a woman's voice. "He likes to climb things." "Emma brought us a radio," said another voice, this one deeper. "How thoughtful." "David is listening to us now," said a third voice. "He can hear us even without the radio." David's eyes snapped open, and when he looked at us, his expression was completely blank. Like he was looking through us rather than at us. "David?" Emma whispered. "They want us to stay," David said in a voice that didn't sound quite like his own. "They want us to join the broadcast." The voices on the radio were getting more excited now, talking faster, overlapping each other. I could make out phrases like "new hosts" and "permanent program" and "tomorrow's show." Jake grabbed David's arm and tried to pull him toward the door, but David didn't budge. He was still staring at nothing, and that blank expression never changed. "We need to get out of here," I said, but Emma was transfixed by the radio equipment. All the meters and displays were going crazy now, and the sound was getting louder. Then the building started shaking. Not like an earthquake, more like the whole structure was vibrating at a specific frequency. The metal walls were humming, and I could feel it in my bones. The radio voices were getting distorted, stretching out like someone was slowing down a recording. I grabbed Emma and physically dragged her toward the door. Jake was still trying to get David to move, but David just stood there, swaying slightly with the vibration of the building. "David, we're leaving," Jake shouted. "I can't," David said. "They're not finished with me." The tower outside was swaying more violently now, and that red light at the top was flashing in a pattern that didn't match its usual rhythm. Jake made a decision and literally picked David up in a fireman's carry. David didn't resist, but he kept talking in that strange, flat voice. "The show must go on," he kept saying. "The show must go on." We ran to the truck and drove away as fast as Jake could navigate the dirt road. Emma was crying, and David had gone completely silent. When we reached the main road, I looked back and saw that the tower's red light was still flashing in that weird pattern. We took David to the hospital, but there was nothing physically wrong with him. After a few hours, he seemed to return to normal, though he had no memory of what happened in the radio building. The doctors said it was probably just a panic attack or some kind of dissociative episode brought on by stress. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. For weeks after that incident, I would sometimes pick up that same clear broadcast on 12:40 a.m. when I was driving alone at night. Always the same big band music, always the same announcer's voice. And sometimes, just sometimes, I would hear David's voice as part of the program. "Broadcasting live from station WXYZ," he would say in that flat, emotionless tone. "The show must go on." I never told the others about hearing David on the radio. What would be the point? But I stopped listening to AM radio completely, and I've never driven past that tower again. Some things are better left alone, and some broadcasts are meant to stay in the past. The thing about these experiences is that they change you. You start to notice things you never noticed before, shadows that move wrong, sounds that don't quite fit, places that feel like they're watching you back. Maybe that's just paranoia, or maybe once you've seen behind the curtain of reality, you can never quite unsee it. Whatever the case, I've learned to trust my instincts about places and situations. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if you ever find yourself exploring somewhere that feels like it doesn't want you there, listen to that feeling. Some doors are closed for a reason, some buildings are abandoned for more than just economics, and some places are better left to whatever has claimed them. Stay safe out there, and remember, not everything that's abandoned is actually empty.